Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar organized by Carbon Market Watch called The Return of the Allowances, Fixing the EU Carbon Market Rules to Drive Industrial Innovation. My name is Ana Gumbau. I'm a climate and energy correspondent with Carbon Pulse, based here in very sunny Brussels today, covering the EU ETS and global carbon pricing policies. I'll be today's moderator, and I'm very excited for this conversation that we're going to be having today. Because I think that for all of us, all eyes are on the policy proposals coming up next month on the Fit for 55 package. Some of you might be calling it Fit for 2030. And that will be introducing major changes to the EU's carbon market precisely to ignite industrial innovation and industrial decarbonisation. So what's bringing us here today? We are presenting today a report by CE Delft, commissioned by our hosts at Carbon Market Watch, which has been looking into the so-called windfall profits, or in this case, unexpected gains that energy-intensive industries have made based on carbon prices. The report by CE Delft is available on Carbon Market Watch's website, as well as its own policy briefing with recommendations based on the study. This study is an update of a previous report that was made back in 2016. It's been 5 years now, and this previous report, I've been told that it's one of the most read and most quoted in the media that's been driving a lot of attention from Carbon Market Watch all of these years. And its update with latest available data, it's extremely timely, as I said, because of the upcoming carbon market reforms and climate policy overall. So CE Delft will introduce the report today, and then we will have a great lineup of high-level panelists where we will be discussing these findings and also the ways forward. And just for some housekeeping rules before we start. In case you have any questions, both on the methodology for our researchers or for our panel, please use the Q&A function, and we will be able to take as many of them as we can in the upcoming hour and a half. And if you would also like to steer the conversation on Twitter, you can use the hashtag. It's hashtag EU ETS windfall. I think it should be appearing on your screens and on your chat. Hashtag EU ETS windfall. And now, without further ado, I will be introducing the panel later on, but we will start first with a presentation of the main findings of the report. That's with Sander de Bruin, Program Manager of Environmental Economics at CE Delft. Sander, thanks for being here. You have 20 minutes to talk us through the report and the main findings, so the floor is yours now.
Yes, thank you very much, Anna. So I will give a presentation. I will try to share my screen. If you can confirm that it is working, that would be...
Yes, brilliant.
Nice. Yes, okay. So I will try it full screen now. So thank you all for attending this workshop. So I will present the study that we undertook for the last, well, almost I think 5 months on the additional profits from the EU ETS. I'm working at CE Delft. We are a research group which is already operating for over 40 years. So we are based in Delft, and I'm myself head of the economics department, where we work with 10 economists. And also this was a project from our department. So the EU ETS, basically, I've been studying the EU ETS since 2007, when I advised the Dutch government on their position in the European negotiations regarding phase 3. And basically it is in operation since 2005, and it is a EU policy instrument. We all know that is regulating and reducing the CO2 emissions. In the past, there has been often critique on the price developments in the EU ETS. Here I show a graph what was in the impact assessment in 2007. This is the yellow line, what was kind of predicted as a price path for the EU ETS. We saw during phase 2 and phase 3, and actually we see that the price was constantly very much below. However, recently this has kind of catched up. And so I think that the EU ETS, from that perspective, is kind of performing towards its expectations. However, there's another strand of critique, which is on the allocation. And that is what this research is about. So the objective of our study was to calculate and analyze the additional profits that sectors and companies have made from the EU ETS between 2008 and 2019. and also to indicate how this additional profit calculation, how it would develop in the future. And in principle, as Anna already said, that we had done this before. In 2015 and 2016, we published 2 reports. And basically, this is a continuation of that research method, but we improved it as well. So we did all kind of additional improvements to make the calculations a bit more reliable, and also to respond to some of the critiques, and sometimes this was fair, that were vowed over our earlier studies. So the delineation of the study is pretty much similar. So we investigate 19 countries, and these are EU countries that are also part of the OECD. And we need this because we needed additional information on the waste gas transfers. That is not publicly available in the European transaction log. So the European Commission doesn't provide this information, but we can calculate it from the energy statistics, basically from the International Energy Agency. So that is why we are limited to the EU countries that are also part of the OECD. You see here the countries that fit this criterion. And then we took basically the 15 sectors with the highest emissions, industrial sectors. So electricity production was not taken into account. We also investigated aviation. You can find aviation in the report, but I will not talk on the rest of aviation, because the position of aviation is really a bit different than from the industry. So actually, in our study, we investigate 3 types of additional profits. So, and the first type is, and this is often recognized, or was recognized in the past, that the companies actually received a lot of allowances for free, and often they received more than they needed. So this is a category profits from over-allocation. Then the second category is profits from using international credits. For compliance, because companies were entitled to use international credits, which are much cheaper for compliance within the EU ETS. And the third is the additional profits from cost pass-through. So I think that in the past, of course, this was in the beginning of the EU ETS, this was proven for electricity sectors that they actually received allowances for free, but were passing them through in the electricity prices. And I think that meanwhile, there has been ample evidence that a similar mechanism may be at play at the industrial sectors as well. So this is a category of cost pass-through. And the total additional profits is simply the sum of these 3 categories. I want to emphasize here that this is not a full account of all costs and benefits related to the EU ETS. So there's a whole category of costs like administrative costs or abatement costs that are not included. And sometimes these are costs, sometimes these are benefits, like also companies may benefit from the compensation of indirect emission costs in some countries. All these additional costs and benefits have not been given to us, calculated by us. So, but we feel that these 3 profit categories probably are the most important ones. So that is another aspect why we also focus on these 3. So the first category is profits from the over-allocation. And well, that is, as I said, that industry actually received more allowances than they needed. And this was especially in phase 2. You can see here in this graph, you can see that in phase 2, the industry was oversupplied. So in megaton CO2, this is the dark blue line. In financial value, this is the light blue line. And in phase 3, this situation was reversed. However, net, they still received more allowances than they needed. And also, if we add up for every year the additional allowances with the price, then we can calculate that these 15 sectors still received over the whole period, 2008 till 2019, more allowances than they needed. As I said before, so we corrected for waste gas transfers here to also make this calculation more reliable than we see some other consultants sometimes do, that they don't make such a correction and you simply go wrong in your analysis of the iron and steel sector. So if we look now at this situation, then you see here that there are actually quite some differences between sectors. So in general, the situation is that refineries was short of allowances in the European Union, but cement was very much oversupplied. And also here you see that petrochemicals is a clear second sector that was oversupplied, and you see also that the iron and steel sector, with this correction, actually they were undersupplied. And you see in some other researchers that they say that the iron and steel sector are oversupplied, but then there was no correction for such waste gas transfers. So if we look at the individual countries, also you see very remarkable differences. You see here especially that Spain is very much oversupplied. So in totally this is a 1.6 billion figure in financial value, and Spain takes about 1.3, 1.4 of these, so very substantially oversupplied. On the other hand, you see that Germany and Austria especially are undersupplied. Also, Belgium is also interesting because it is one of the smaller countries that is very considerably oversupplied. So the second category are profits from international credit conversions. So as I said before, companies could actually use much cheaper credits for coverage in the EU ETS. And you see here in the light blue line, you see actually the price developments of these international credits. Well, nowadays you can compensate your CO2 emissions for 10 cents per ton. So that's also why you always must be critical by what are my CO2 emissions compensated. But it's a bit sad that companies until the 1st of January of this year, they could still use this to hand in the EU ETS as a compliance record. And actually that means that given the fact that they were already oversupplied and they all used this facility to the max, that they could gain additional credits, which they could sell subsequently on the market. And so we see here what is the outcome for the sector. So you see here that here is a category that the iron and steel sector profited most from, but also the cement and the refinery sectors were also profiting quite considerably from this. And then the third category of additional profits is profits from cost pass-through. And as I said before, so this has been proven for electricity production, but also we see that there is a lot of, well, there's not that many empirical research, but pretty much has been conducted in the past, and we saw every time that there were significant figures on the cost pass-through. The problem with this is that it is very uncertain, and if you make a literature review, which we did in the study, you see that these cost pass-through ranges, they differ wildly, and in general the maximum which you see in the research is close to 100%, except for cement and inorganic chemicals. There we see lower maximum ranges, and the lower ranges in some cases is 0%, and in some cases we have 20–30%. And so what we did actually in our research, that we said, okay, you know, this maximum, let's not calculate with the maximum, but let's calculate with the minimum and the average. So we took a conservative estimate here. And now also here is a line that is companies claim officially that they do not do this and that such research is flawed. I want to say, give here three. We also touched upon this argument in the study, because actually there are three arguments why companies would do this. And first is the traditional opportunity cost argument. So this is traditional economics, which is saying, well, if you get a piano for free from your grandmother, but you don't like piano playing, then you are not selling it for free. So if you get something for free, you will sell it at the market price. And companies always have the choice to use these allowances in production or to sell it. And economic theory says that if you have this mechanism, then companies in the long run are more effective and will survive better if they pass this through in the cost of their production. They will make more profit and are in the long term better in attracting investments. So the second argument is a marginal cost argument. And that is that actually the companies, especially in the latest years, we saw already that from 2013, these companies are actually short in allowances, and they do not receive enough allowances to cover their annual emission. They still had a huge substantial stock of allowances from earlier years, But so companies that are short of allowances, that if they want to expand production, they have to buy an additional allowance on the market. So of production decisions in this situation of such a hybrid mix, that you get only free allowances to the benchmark, and above you have to buy it. You get it only for your historic production. If you expand production, you have to buy it. That makes that companies will put this forward into product prices. The third is more a market price argument. It is that the price development in markets may actually reflect inefficient producers, and inefficient producers often are producing above benchmark levels. So they are kind of more price setters. So companies that have short of allowances tend to be price setters in markets. So all these are three different arguments, can explain actually why companies do this. And this third argument also can explain why companies say, we don't do it. But if, for example, in a given market, the price of oil products includes a CO2 cost component, because one producer actually settles this price, then all the others will adjust to this. So individual companies may not even be deliberately doing this, but they may simply follow the market. So these prices, they also higher prices is actually not always a good thing, of course, because you also run the risk that you lose market share, and we corrected for this. And in general, here this figure gives actually the loss in market shares compared to the loss in profits from a potential loss in market shares compared to the additional profits gained from passing through the costs. And we see that they were always around 90%. So this is also another example why we think that it's for companies more profitable to pass through the costs and accept a small loss in market share than simply compete only on price. So the profits from cost pass-through, so we calculated that, and that is by far the highest component, so there's 28 to 46 billion of euros. So we see here that the iron and steel sector, again, profited most from this, followed by the refineries. The other sectors are a bit smaller, but still, in the cement sector, it could still between 3.5 and 6.5 billion euros. So this is a very substantial amount of money. And if we add then all these three categories together, we derive at the total estimate. As I said, we have this a minimum cost pass-through, so that was in general between 20 to 30%, an average cost pass-through rates, and then we come here to a total of 30 to 50 billion euros of additional profits. The iron and steel sector here is the largest, between 12 and 16. And followed by the cement and refineries are also important sectors. And this is a total over the period 2008 to 2019. Then if we look at individual countries, you see in general, of course, that the bigger countries have more additional profits. So we see here first Germany, that is in the average already almost 10. And then we see here in the average cost pass-through a couple of countries with around 5, a bit more than 5. So that's France, Italy, Spain, and the UK. And again, Belgium is one of the smaller countries that has over 3 billion euros of additional profits in the average variant, and 2 in the minimum variant of cost pass-through. So we also provided in our report for every country included a top 5 or a top 10 only for the bigger countries. And we give, I want to emphasize that we give a top 5 on verified emissions. So we looked at the biggest companies in terms of verified emissions, and then we calculated their additional profits by adding all other installations that these sectors were having in the EU ETS registry. So I want to say that this analysis on the company level is largely based on EU ETS installation names rather than on ownership. It is sometimes a bit indicative, because not that these calculations are indicative, because these calculations are as precise as possible given the methods that I explained earlier. But it could be that, for example, an installation of one firm actually is registered as belonging to another firm. So from that perspective, you must always understand that this is on installation names plus additional information that we have. So if we look at Germany, for example, this was the biggest country. So we see that of these 9 billion, almost 10 billion euros additional profits, we see that ThyssenKrupp, so the steel manufacturer, actually is already taking out like 14%. So that's only one company with lots of installations in Germany. And we see here that also BASF and the Heidelberg Cement from other sectors, we see that they gained considerable additional profits. And in iron and steel sector, it's interesting that despite that these two largest companies were actually short of emission allowances, you can see here they didn't receive enough, but they gained through the other mechanisms still considerably additional profits. So then we had I'm almost finished. So we had also outlook. So what will happen actually in phase 4? So, and we identified like 6 mechanisms that could play a role. And some of them actually stimulate the additional profits, so make higher additional profits, and other make lower additional profits. So to start with the lower one, so that is in green. So actually the allocation rules have changed, and they became a bit more dynamic. So there's a more often update of the historic activity level in the ETS calculations. And actually that is in itself can be a positive thing. So it will result in a lower cost pass-through tendency, because companies will take also into account that if they expand production, then they get a reward from this actually next year. And namely, they can get more allowances, and such rewards constitute a kind of opportunity benefit from expanding production, and that can actually lower the cost pass-through. It comes at a price, though. Maybe in the discussion we can discuss that, because actually the system itself becomes less efficient with dynamic allocation. So the CO2 prices, the reductions can be achieved at higher costs. So there will also be an update, of course, in the linear reduction factor that goes from 1.74 to 2.2. So that will result in less free allowances, so lower additional profits. The benchmark updates are similar. I think that was quite substantial what happened, and that will result in considerably less free allowances. And also the international credits conversion are no longer possible in phase 4. So these are all on the positive sides. On the other side, there are two prime negatives. So first, there is a higher CO2 price. So in principle, this would result in a higher cost pass-through. But I must say that we don't know this for sure, because all the empirical literature was established when the prices were between the 3 and the 25 euro a ton CO2. So at the present prices of 55, I think they are very high, unrealistically high even, but they are kind of this would be kind of out of sample forecast. So there's a high uncertainty on this. I think that you can be more sure that if you combine a CBAM mechanism with free allowances, that you will get higher cost pass-through actually in the market. Because at that moment also the only factor why you wouldn't pass through the full opportunity cost is that you are fearing that you lose too much market share towards foreign competition, and that argument actually falls then away. So I think that you will then should calculate them with 100% cost pass-through if the CBAM effectively assures that there is no threat from foreign competition on carbon costs. So So these are kind of the outlook for phase 4. So the conclusions of our research is basically that EU ETS has resulted in very substantial additional profit. So we calculated them worth 30 to 50 billion euros. So cost pass-through is the largest component of these additional profits. Of course, this is also the least certain component. The other component we can calculate very precisely. This component we have to say that we took a minimum and an average calculation here to give a conservative estimate of the range. But we didn't give the maximum because then it would be even much higher. But we felt that otherwise that would be too much in the media, then everybody would only quote this largest figure. So that was probably why we didn't choose it. So the international credit conversion and the over allocation are basically some elements that are fixed in phase 4. I don't expect that that will be an important category for the future. However, cost pass-through is still possible to a large extent. And I also want to say that it's, of course, not clear what will happen actually to the cost pass-through rates when these CO2 prices are so much higher. I want to say that until 2000, we, of course, didn't have such high prices. The average price of 2000 was still slightly below 25 euros a ton CO2. So you shouldn't think that this already invalidates our critique of our study ourselves. No, our study stands for such price ranges. However, presently, 55 euro a ton, we simply don't know it. So I think that if politicians want to lower the additional profits, they should better target free allocation. I think there are two ways actually to do this. First is to make a system with CBAM and auctioning, so that would be worthwhile to consider firstly. The other thing, of course, is that you could also say that if CBAM fails, then you could still think of subsidizing investment in industry and to make sure that they can compete well on world markets, also with considerably lower carbon costs. And in both policy packages, I think you could raise the share of auctioning considerably. Okay, I think this was my presentation. So I didn't write this alone. This was a team of, so Ellen and Dan were my colleagues. And well, if you have questions, I put here my email address. So always willing to answer them. Thank you.
Brilliant, Sander. Thank you so much for presenting, the results of such a comprehensive study in a very compelling and very clear way. And also thanks, by the way, for sticking with the time. As a reminder, you can submit questions through the Q&A section. And I think already Sander has a couple of questions when it comes to the methodology. And maybe if I can answer one of them real quick as a matter of just clarification. We got the question on how is the term profit being defined in general in the study and whether this is an equivalent to financial benefits. If you could perhaps give us a 5 cents on that clarification on the definition.
Yeah, thank you. So profit is in our definition indeed a financial benefit. So it is not something that companies did like illegally. No, this is completely legitimate. So it was a legitimate profit that's actually from a system that was, of course, made possible through political choices. But this was completely legitimate. So it is a financial benefit. Yeah. It was possible to fix. Yeah, that's an interesting question. The second question from Sabine. Of course, free allowances, are more under scrutiny in general because in some studies, for example, they are taken into account as an implicit subsidy to industry. And I think that from our analysis, you can say, yeah, that there is a point to say this, because if companies can pass through these costs actually to the customers, then it constitutes a kind of an implicit subsidy. If they couldn't do that, then that would be more and more difficult. So So what will it take to stop free allowances? Yeah, that is also more more political will in the end. Of course, the ETS is a political system, so it is not like a resource market where we can delve additional resources. No, so that has to be a part of a political decision. With the question from Oliver, thank you, Oliver, for joining this. So we also quoted some research from you. So I know that you also did very interesting work on the cement sector. So basically, our cost pass-through rates were kind of from a literature review. So we didn't conduct our own estimates this time. I did this in the past, so I did two types of estimates, and one, I didn't put this fuel or raw material input costs into it, because then I did only on market price rates differences between the EU and the United States, and I observed that you could find traces of CO2 price components there. In the second research, which we did in 2015, which was published in Energy Economics last year, we did include fuel and raw material input costs, because first is that our results were invalid because we didn't include these. So in the second effort, we did that. So we did not, no, it is not just a theoretically based speculation, so that is not true, but it is based on a literature review. So, and it was not only our literature, but we cited like in total, I think around 10 papers, and some that did ex ante research. There's also a study of Vivid Economics, for example, that took a completely different route of estimation, but they also came to quite considerably high cost pass-through rate. So it is not just us who think that, but it is a wider range of literature. Yeah, and of course, now the comment from Frederic, that is of course true. We didn't do a full cost benefit analysis on the results. So we calculated how much allowances companies had over. And if you believe, you know, I see that there is a difference actually in the literature on the amount of CO2 reductions that were undertaken by industry. But suppose that it would have massively resulted in CO2 reductions, and then that would be counted in our study as an additional profit. Yeah. But I'm not convinced there. I see that the literature is very mixed on the efficiency of the UETS. So in general, it may have reduced some emissions, and in that case, that is indeed investigated in our study as an additional profit. I think that in total it is likely that this is quite small.
Right. Sander, thanks a lot for the responses. Let's perhaps move on to the panel, and then if there's any more methodological questions, we can get back to them if that's all right. Just a reminder, keep sending the questions on the Q&A section, and we will be continuing to take them. And also keep in mind that you can use the hashtag EUETSWindfall to tweet around our webinar back on Twitter. As I said, I will turn now to our panelists. I'm very happy to be introducing Mr. Mohamed Shahim, a member of the European Parliament with the S&D Group and Vice President of the S&D Group. Thank you very much for joining us today. We also have Oti Hanpera, leading specialist with Citra on climate and nature solutions. Ursula Woodburn as well, Program Director for the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability and Leadership. Mr. Stefan Savonen, Senior Vice President for Energy and Climate at LKAB. Thanks a lot to all of you for joining us. And also as well, Carbon Market Watch's own Sam van den Plas, Policy Director. Thanks a lot for having us in this case, and great to be sharing this panel with you. I would like to first turn on to Mr. Shahim to get your first reactions around the study and the topic that brings us here together. I mean, we have a massive climate package coming up, which can potentially be a game changer for industrial decarbonization. And we've already seen from previous discussions at the Parliament, and also when we were talking earlier on the possible bottlenecks that the discussions are going to be facing around the issues on free allocation and enabling industrial decarbonization. So if we could get your take and talk us through about how you intend to address these issues. Thank you so much. Mr. Shahim, you're muted.
This is always the case with online events. I try to mute to not interrupt presentations. So first of all, thank you, Anna. Thank you, Carbon Market Watch, for inviting me, and Sander for your nice presentation. I think the report is a very good report, and I hope that many of my colleagues will read it, or at least read the summary, because there already I think the most important points are underlined. We've seen, for example, I was negotiating the carbon border adjustment mechanism within the Parliament, and there you see that there are many groups that want to have their cake and eat it too. So they want to have free allowances, and they want to have some kind of carbon leakage mechanism still in place, and they want to protect industry from, let's say, the companies outside the EU. I mean, that will be a bit difficult to have all these things at the same time. For me, if we look at instruments to decarbonize our industry, we have to see what is effective and what is needed for us to, for example, also help industry to become less carbon intense. And I think in some cases, we can even say that free allowances have made some of the sectors perform worse or less compared to, for example, industries in Asia and other regions in the world. Due to these free allowances and due to this over-subsidizing, I do believe that these free allowances should be seen as a type of subsidies, especially when you get more than you need and you get the possibility to sell them. And it's even worse in some cases. I was talking to a representative of the steel industry, and I asked him, how could you overcompensate your loss by only selling your free allowances? And he stated that they had to close down some of their facilities, but the free allowances that were allocated to them due to the existence of those facilities were kept in place, and they could sell them, which is a quite perverse mechanism within the system. I mean, you can say that we need the free allowances to protect some kind of carbon leakage, which up to now, I have seen no proof that this exists at all. But apparently, we should never take facts into consideration when you are debating climate change and carbon intensity of products. But let's go there. I mean, let's say, okay, this carbon leakage exists, and let's say that free allowances help. Then giving companies more than they need is ridiculous. I mean, it's not necessary. And I think what this report shows is the vast amount of revenues or profits or shares or whatever you call it, that are being made based on nothing, based on free allowances that are based on some kind of benchmark and that you then can sell. I mean, we can have a debate about the cost pass-through, which I think to some extent will exist, but that's something that we can at least talk about, analyze, and then maybe as politicians think about compensating factors, compensating consumers for the fact that we will have a higher carbon price that companies will pass through to them. I mean, and then at the end of the day, consumers have the choice to buy that product, yes or no? Because what I see is that a lot of these measures that we are taking are anyhow financed through taxes, and we all have to contribute to them. I mean, climate damage is not internalized in many of these cost structures. I mean, if that's the case, then we can at least, we do not need to come up with policies, for example, to improve biodiversity or to repair damages caused by carbon or by any other well, negative effect caused by production. So for me, it will be very important to make sure that, I mean, these free allowances, if they exist, that they should be fair, and that the calculation method is done based on what is needed, and then combined with the carbon border adjustment mechanism, as I have tried to convince some of my colleagues, is that we have a gradual and, in my opinion, fast reduction of the free allowances, and at the same time increasing the CBAM mechanism. I mean, these are two communicating valves. That's something that at least I would like to see. And again, let's look at what's really working, and let's see how we can reassess, reevaluate the ETS system. I do believe it's a very complex procedure. I mean, I think it will be clear that the total number of allowances has to decrease because they do not fit reality anymore. I do also believe that increasing the linear reduction factor is also a very good step forward. I mean, these two things, I mean, if we cannot agree on that, whether you are a right-wing politician or a left-wing politician, then you're not making any sense, because this is just adjusting the system to reality. We can have a debate on how much we should reduce it year-to-year basis, but this one-off decrease of total allowances is something we need to do, and the Commission will come up with that. And then we have to discuss, okay, what are the additional needs that we need to do? Which sectors do we need to include, and how will they influence the number of free allowances, and how will they influence the price of ETS? The Commission is thinking about creating even new ETS systems related to, for example, the building environment and public and road transport. I mean, how will we deal with free allowances there? What will I mean, can we learn from the past, and how can we implement that in upcoming systems? That will be, I think, one of the major steps. And what I really like about this research, and I've seen the previous reports that were in, I think also by CE Delft, I think you even mentioned them, Sander, that had approximately the same message. I hope that this resonates within the Commission and also within the Parliament, because this is something, this perverse effect of this ETS system we should get rid of it somehow, because it's not fair. It's creating revenues that shouldn't be there, and at the end of the day is not creating a just transition that we want to have. So thanks again, and I'm looking forward to debate with the panelists.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shaheen, for this first remarks. I would like to turn to you now, to O-Team. I would like to draw onto a report that CEVA published just fairly recently on the role of the EU ETS and increasing the EU's climate ambition. You looked into detail on the implications of aligning the EU ETS with the 1.5 Celsius degree target. And I wanted to ask you, what did your research conclude on when it comes specifically to the reform of free allocation and measures related to carbon leakage? Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. And first of all, congratulations, Carbon Market Watch, for completing the report. And thanks, Mr. Shaheen, for your insight already. So yeah, CITRA published a report back in 2019 on reforming the EU ETS to align it with the targets of the Paris Agreement. So, and my comments on this report reflects the findings of our study. And the key point is really to align the EU ETS with the new EU-wide climate target. Of course, the new climate target is lower than we would have hoped, but we have to now play what we have. And aligning the EU ETS with the new climate target is absolutely essential. And we should do this by rebasing the cap. This is a one-off, implementing a one-off reduction to the cap, as well as increasing the linear reduction factor. And then there are other issues we should do as well, such as keeping the higher intake rate of the market stability reserve. And timing is really everything. The quicker we do these changes, the better. And in our study, we also looked at other options to increase the ambition of the EU ETS. And one of the options was a tiered approach to free allocation. And this means by reducing the amount of allowances given out for free and then cancelling those allowances, we could also then increase the ambition of the EU ETS. However, this option was not included in our final list of recommendations because there are more efficient ways to increase the ambition. So when you look at the ambition, there are more efficient ways to increase it, and also potentially more politically feasible way to increase the ambition. We also looked at the political feasibility of the different options. And maybe then we can say that the free allocation is more about fairness than just about the ambition. And I think you argue that very well in your report. So I think I pause there. These were the key messages from our report. Thank you.
Brilliant. We will surely be able to discuss the measures and the instruments in much more detail throughout our discussion. Thank you, Outi. Now, I would like to give the floor to Ursula from the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. I mean, in your case, you represent, or as part of a corporate leaders group as well, there are members from several leading European companies. And I mean, in this case, I wanted to ask you, how do you think that in the upcoming reforms, policymakers should be looking at this interaction between industrial competitiveness and climate policy? And I mean, in this case, what we have discussed in previous conversations would have really enabled this competitive sustainability. If you could give us some first thoughts, Ursula. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Great to be here. Yes, I mean, yeah, as you mentioned, I also work with a group of leading companies through the Corporate Leaders Group, who are really focused on supporting the transition to net zero economies. And I think that, you know, we have been really keen to support an ambitious package of measures to achieve the EU's climate ambition. And this is a really critical element. I think as you mentioned, we are in a process now where the world is moving to net zero. So the question is, how do we support leading companies to deliver the services, the climate neutral services and the materials necessary to achieve that? How do we achieve this competitive sustainability that is mentioned in the EU's documents and so forth? I think absolutely we need to look at how to design a system that incentivizes innovation. So how can we take this question of the ETS and the allowances and turn it around to trigger the innovation we need, both for incumbents and new entrants? Because I mean, it's clear that in the long term, if you have a carbon border adjustment mechanism, for example, you cannot maintain the current system. How do we support companies to innovate? How do you drive that long-term sustainability and competitiveness in the global market? So we have also been looking quite a lot at the question of markets. So along with Agora Energiewende, and I see Ollie's in the comments and the questions as well, we've been looking at how to create demand. So how do you really, on the one hand, support breakthrough innovation in emissions reductions, but also support demand for the climate neutral materials that will come out of innovative and leading companies? So this means, I think that we need to tackle both measures. We need to tackle the push and the pull measures to trigger industrial innovation and to and to make sure that we have we support companies that are ready to innovate and ready to deliver the materials and services we need to transition to a net zero economy.
Goodness, sorry, I lost my own screen.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Ursula. Thanks a lot for setting the scene and for this first remarks. I mean, I think there's additional instruments and measures to support as both the pull and the push will be featuring throughout the debate and gonna be a key part of the upcoming reforms. So looking forward to discussing that in more detail. I would like to turn now also to Mr. Stefan Savonen from Swedish mining group LKAB. I'd be very interested in hearing your thoughts, especially since we've heard that the iron and steel sector seem to have been making the most gains according to the report from those additional profits. I mean, in this case, I think it's also important that to stress that LKAB has also filed a lawsuit against the European Commission fairly recently over the benchmarks used to determine the free allocation for steel making. So if we could get some first comments relating this first two questions, so how the findings of this report fit into LKAB's low carbon perspectives and the upcoming reforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for the invitation to participate here today. Well, it's an interesting report, and I think it highlights that there is a great potential for improvements of the ETS. If the system is to deliver CO2 reduction, carbon dioxide emissions must cost and not be a source of income. That is the first thing. Today, the benchmark system in the ETS doesn't favor innovative products or the development of new climate efficient processes. We know that because we have been working with this with the ETS since 2015, trying to bring about a change to the system. But unfortunately, we cannot claim that it has produced any results. Major forces are working in the opposite direction to maintain the possibility of continuing to emit large amounts of CO2 without entailing any or very low costs, as we could see in this report. Even if you can question on how much the cost pass-through can be or so on, you see that the cost is very low. Unfortunately, even in phase 4, the Commission has more or less chosen to protect the laggards instead of supporting frontrunners. In our case, the system's shortcomings are expressed in the fact that the climate efficient sintered iron ore pellets that we produce are not allowed to be included in the sinter benchmark, like all the other producers of sintered iron ore products in EU. We are kept out of the benchmark, even though our product is a direct substitute for the sinter products manufactured by the steel industry. The major difference between our product and the steel industry's product is the carbon footprint. We have cut our CO2 emissions down from 190 to about 30 kilos CO2 per ton of product since the 60s, while the steel industry still is at the level we were then. And despite the intentions of the ETS, the result of the Commission decisions regarding our pellets, LKAB's pellets, will in practice be a protection for the steel sector, even though indisputable facts are on the table. I mean, if we would have been let into a simpler benchmark, it would have stimulated a transition to a more climate efficient technology by rewarding the transition from sinter to sinter pellet, rather than, as it is now, punishing the pellets. So that shows that the benchmark system isn't where it should be. This large-scale transition that this could have led to, go from sinter and end up with sinter pellets in the EU instead, would gain around 16 million tons of CO2 annually if we could get the system to push in that direction. But unfortunately, the Commission hasn't listened to us, even though they are obliged to make independent decisions based on fact. And the facts that we have presented have not been taken into account at all by the Commission. Instead, they have chosen to listen to the claims of few referred lobbyists, and whose aims is to maximize, of course, the free allocation for the members, and not to ensure the proper functioning of the ETS system. So that is why we have chosen to appeal against the Commission's benchmark decision for phase 4. And now we place our trust in the General Court and that they look at our case independently of lobbyists and take a decision based on scientific facts and the overall purpose of the ETS. But we also hope that our court case brings light to the fact that the ETS system is not being applied as intended, and that we get a debate around the ETS system like this today, and how it needs to be improved if the EU is to achieve the climate objectives. It is clear for us that the system in its current form is not powerful enough. In the coming review, I think the ETS need to be significantly improved. The system needs to be adapted to the existence of climate-efficient processes and products that need to be given at least the same conditions on the market by the system as the traditional carbon-intensive processes and products have. And we will be depending on that, since we will industrialize a production of carbon-free spong iron with green hydrogen during this decade, and by 2045 our entire production will be carbon dioxide free. In this way we will reduce the value chain CO2 emission by 35 million tons annually. But to be able to fulfill our obligation, we need regulations that already now starts to provide at least a level playing field for climate efficient technologies and not punish frontrunners. One more example besides the CETA benchmark, where there are system errors, is for hydrogen production. We will be depending on green hydrogen for our transition, which has higher OPEX and CAPEX than hydrogen produced with natural gas. Production with natural gas receives free allocation of emission allowances from the ETS, while we, on the other hand, and others who will choose to produce the more costly green hydrogen will not be a part of the system if nothing is changed. So the system must start to consider the value chain perspective, so that the most climate efficient value chain for producing a product are normative. We also hope that CBAM will be introduced in such a way that it doesn't reduce the pressure on industry to make the production more climate efficient. And that is why we cannot have both free allocation and CBAM to protect the laggards. The system must be developed primarily to benefit frontrunners, those who invest in climate efficient technologies and take climate change for real. They need policy instruments that supports them. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, for this first remarks. I think that fits very well into introducing our last panelist, Sam van den Plas with Carbon Market Watch. Alongside the study presented by CE Delft, Carbon Market Watch has also presented a set of recommendations, a policy briefing called the phantom leakage, which, I mean, we are quite big on Star Wars remarks here. So I just wondered if you could talk us through the different recommendations and the ways forward to be taking into account, and perhaps ignite this new hope if we can continue with the movie references based on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you for spotting the team here. But cheek and tongue there, but this is a serious debate, and the debate about free pollution permits and how we justify them, we believe sits at the core of the next EU ETS review, and hence also this initiative and the report we're presenting today. Our starting point for this debate is that in times of a climate crisis, no company should be allowed to continue to pollute and emit greenhouse gases for free, let alone, as we just saw the testimony from the steel sector, be rewarded from holding on to a highly polluting business model under current policy frameworks. So I'll add a few thoughts on that, because our greatest concern is that the current decline in free emission allowances is not compatible with any net zero carbon goals, whether it's 2040 or 2050. Time is clearly running out. So even if you're looking at other types of policy proposals, the general clarity needs to be is that we need less, not more carbon leakage protection going forward, because with the results presented here, we see that there are not only a significant amount of windfall profits accumulated by these industries, but keep in mind also hundreds of billions worth of free emission allowances are handed out, which is potential government income, which is potential innovation funding, and indeed handed out in a very untargeted manner to large polluting industries. And this comes at a time that the European Union and the European Commission is ready to present a package of legislative instruments where it will expect European citizens to pay more for their carbon pollution, and then look specifically at proposals for the Energy Taxation Directive, carbon pricing for buildings and transport. And those are there for good reasons. More needs to happen in those sectors. The conditions should be right, but okay, that's another discussion. I'm not going into that here. But in that light, I mean, if we're looking at other sectors to do more, how will the social equity component of the Fit for 55 package be understood by citizens if large incumbent polluters are left off the hook and citizens are expected to pick up the tab? I think that's a key question. The second key question is the question of balance in this discussion, because this is this is a complex discussion, and Sander did an excellent job unpicking that. What we are seeing is that the current system of free allowances is rewarding more carbon intensive production routes and generating additional unexpected or windfall profits for those incumbent industries. Now, this is important to keep in mind in the policy making discussions which are coming up as well, because when those industries argue for more carbon leakage protection, they have a clear vested economic interest on the back of that system. And to be clear, we are not blaming those industries for taking the views that they have. It's also clear that this is not an intentional process, but rather the consequence of rational economic behavior. But for policymakers, this is a key consideration, because ultimately it's European policymakers who have to strike a better balance between carbon leakage protection on one side, which benefits large polluting industries, and better climate protection on the other side, which benefits the whole of society. So our recommendations are also really to make sure that we support energy intensive industries ultimately. I'm not only here to complain about that, but we need to make sure that all those industries will transition to climate neutrality as soon as possible. And part of the message today, I think as well, is that we're mindful these industries cannot do it on their own. And this is a call to action for a more robust policy framework to deliver industrial decarbonization. And by calling for targeted public support for energy intensive industries, I think also from the NGO side, there is a helping hand and a constructive way forward presented here. But as I said, time is running out and it's time to get to work. So I look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sam. And I think we've set the scene for the debate. And I would like to perhaps pick up in one of the ideas that has come up from Sandra's presentation earlier on. So the report presents two ways to limit additional profits on energy intensive industries, and one of them is to perhaps make free allocation fully in line with actual production. So like perhaps more of this dynamic allocation. Sander, you've mentioned earlier that this could come at a price, so to say, and there are some ideas for and against that. So perhaps if someone would want to elaborate more on that and see what are the risks, what are the opportunities here. I don't know, perhaps Sam would want to pick up on that first, or Sander, you want to respond?
Yeah, well, I can add a few words to this. I want to add, because in principle, it is a way how you could make companies not want to forward the production, the prices in the product, because actually, if they want to achieve as large as possible production, because if they get a larger production, they would also get more free allowances in the next year. And model calculations from French economists showed, for example, that under such a scheme, if you they limited this to 2 sectors, cement and steel, and then they showed that the resulting carbon price could be even a factor 2 higher compared to only auctioning. So auctioning clearly is more efficient because if the targets are set right, then a low carbon price is basically better, you know. So if the targets are not set ambitious enough, then you cannot state that, because then it is a lack of ambition. But now I think that if the Commission steps up to minus 55%, I remember that in 2012 we did a research that we were saying that from the impact assessment, basically it was better to strive at a higher reduction target than minus 40%. We then calculated it very precisely as minus 47%, I remember, as the most beneficial. So the Commission wants now to go much further, even minus 55. So the target is set okay. So there is no doubt about the target anymore. And then it becomes important. So how do we keep this CO2 price as low as possible in the scheme? Because otherwise, you know, it can be disruptive. Also, if even if firms get free allowances, you know, if the emission price would rise up to 150, you know, I'm not so sure what would happen. Also, for politicians, there will be a lot of pressure to do something about this, to make more free allowances possible. So a low carbon price is in principle not a bad thing in the ETS. And I think that if you look at it, because if a company doesn't put forward this price in the product, then also consumers get the wrong price signal, because they are not rationalizing on their purchases. They don't take the carbon content of the products into account. So, and you want basically that everywhere, so both from production, but also in the consumers, take into account the carbon content of their choices. And so this is best satisfied if you do auctioning. So more dynamic allocation may solve one problem, but you introduce another problem.
Right, I see. Thank you very much, Sander, for the clarification. And I mean, I think it's very important what you mentioned about setting the right price signal, but not necessarily having a very high price by itself is going to drive decarbonization, because we are already seeing with current carbon prices that we're seeing a number of companies significantly struggling to already comply under current prices. So I see Sam has his hand raised. So if you want to add to that.
Yeah, just to add a thought to that, because I mean, of course, the price signal is what is delivered by supply and demand. And from an economic perspective, any given price is basically the result of what the total amount of allowances says and the total amount of emissions. Of course, when looking at the carbon price signal the past decade in the ETS, we've lost a lot of time, because as long as carbon prices were between €5 and €10 per ton, especially in the power sector, it did not prevent power companies to continue emitting in high emitting or slightly lower emitting infrastructure. And today, this is coming back to bite them, because especially running coal and lignite plants on a daily basis, even if they are very efficient compared to others, you're not doing that at a profit anymore. So I think this is also a question about ensuring that a lower carbon price today, if it would come back, that it doesn't create a lock-in into higher emitting infrastructure later. And when we talk about sectors like steel, cement, and chemicals, 2050 is one investment cycle away because of the long-lived assets. These are very expensive installations, and they have a very long lifetime and very long depreciation time. So this is exactly why, I mean, just the carbon price signal is not the only silver bullet here. And then talking about one of the effects of higher carbon prices, it means, of course, also the monetary value, the market price of the free emission allowances is rising in similarly. And we have more than 6.3 billion emission allowances foreseen to be handed out between 2021 and 2030. Well, at current carbon prices of 50 euros per ton, this is more than 300 billion euros in monetary value. And again, we think this is a public resource which could be invested in a lot smarter ways.
Mr. Shahim, I'm sure that you've been taking very good note on what's been mentioned. So just wanted to perhaps get your views on that. And yes, please.
Yeah, so many good things have been said. I mean, there are some differences. So basically, the way we will attack or the way we want to become climate neutral by 2050, it's not one package. It's not one type of legislation. It's basically three pillars. One is like the strategic programs. Then we have the financial instruments with loans, subsidies, etc. But then we have a bunch of legislation that's coming up. So it will not be only ETS. We also have some other things. But I mean, ETS is a very important instrument. And what Stefan was saying is something that I think also a lot of the politicians should be much more aware of. I mean, we do have 1 or 2 investment cycles up to 2050. And we need to become state of the art. We need to improve our competitiveness. We need to be the best, I mean, producing most efficient, effective, least carbon intense sectors of the world. I mean, the reason, I mean, so we need to get rid of all effects that basically slow those developments down. So we need to support the front runners instead of the laggers. And that has to deal with current technology, but also I mean, the lobbyists from those. I mean, we need more people like Stefan speaking out and saying, okay, we are also exist. Companies like us also exist, and we have another path that we can choose for. I mean, at the end of the day, we don't want to have any revenues related to carbon. I mean, that's the ideal. We would like to get rid of all these type of measures, because that means we are not emitting any carbon, and we do not need these type of legislation. So we need to support companies like Stefan has said, the innovating companies, but we also need more people speaking out from these front runners, saying, okay, we need this within ETS, and maybe we need to improve the situation, to improve the investment situation, to make companies like us grow, and not only taking care of well, basically the laggers. The second thing I mean, the CBAM for me is very essential, not only to make sure that we get rid of the free allowances, but also as a measure to make sure that companies outside the EU also start showing more ambition, starting to think about the carbon content of their product. I mean, it's not only about an equal level playing field, it's one of the few instruments we have to say to the rest of the world, if you want to sell your products to European consumers, okay, then there are some requirements there, or you have to pay. I mean, these are two very important elements that at least my group will take into consideration when we are looking at the full package, which consists of 12 programs. So 10 will be launched in July, and I think 2 by the end of the year. So ETS will play an important role. I think we need to make sure that it works better. I think it's starting working well. I mean, we can have a debate on what should be the right price. Should it be maybe above 100 or not? I mean, at the end of the day, I think that also is part of the fairness of the system. But we have to look at what works for these companies. Yeah, let's see what the Commission will come with. Let's see where we as a Parliament can have an influence on the system. But also we need NGOs and companies to speak out to their local or to the member state governments, because I mean the council at the end of the day has also a quite significant power, and what they are doing is just protecting their own industry and the current how do you say that, the current their own industry basically. And at the end of the day, I do not know whether that will be the mentality that we need within this 1 or 2 investment cycles to really transform our sectors.
Mm-hmm. I think the question here is really how to encourage, how to support those so-called front runners, these industries at the forefront of decarbonisation. And we're seeing now that we have a massive legislative package coming up ahead. I mean, we're talking about, as you mentioned, Mr. Shahim, 12 legislative proposals coming up either in July or at least by the end of the year, so to say. Making these pieces of this puzzle fit together is going to be a massive task and really important to get it right. So the question is how, and how do we enable?
And they're all interlinked. I mean, they're all interlinked. And my fear is that when we are looking at them separately, there will be a mass lobbying on the individual programs, and that then the coordination or like the idea behind it, whether it will fit for the at least 55 in 2030. Mm-hmm. But don't forget also climate neutrality by 2050. If we start pushing around on the individual programs, I'm really afraid that at the end it's too complex to have to say whether we will achieve the goals. That's why I'm very happy that in the council, in the climate law negotiations, we've agreed upon some kind of independent climate, let's say, board that will also give suggestions to the European Commission, and I hope also to the member states, to see whether we are in line and to see whether we need to reassess the legislation that we made and step up a bit, because that will be very essential, I think, within this process.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And I am based on that, if I may turn to OT, what do you think that are the main instruments and really the key points to really get this the upcoming reforms right?
I think there are probably as many opinions as there are attendees in this panel, but I think keys, I believe in EU ETS. It's been there for a while. We know it's not a perfect system, but it has worked, and we know how to improve it. So I think, for example, in our report, we have the percentage points, how to increase the linear reduction factor, etc. So we really know how to do that, and I think the legislators should just go on and get the job done. When it comes to CBAM, I think we cannot talk about a free allocation without talking about CBAM. They're kind of there's a bit of marriage there. And I think there, the key is really how to implement that. And for us, the key dimensions are that, the climate should be in the heart of the design of that system, and cost-efficient emission reductions. And I'm really looking forward to an impact assessment that would actually try to showcase how the measure would work and what kind of impacts it would have in practice, because I think those estimates are still missing from all the debates I've been following. And then there is this enhancing the multilateral system and WTO rules, and maintaining a relationship with our trading partners. And of course, you have to take into considerations of the competitors' concerns of the EU industry, including the export industry. And I think that's something that might be a difficult kind of exercise here. And then the fourth key thing is the efficient and fair use of those resources that we can collect with the instrument. I think that's also something that should be a very transparent and fair way to go forward. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Oti. I was thinking, Ursula, perhaps you would want to also follow up on that and see, like how we can get the reforms right to really be supporting decarbonization of industries and sustainable front runners.
Thanks. Yes, Anna. No, I think it's really critical. I mean, how can we really do this correctly? And I fully support also what MEP Chen was saying about the need for the package to overall work, right? I think that it is so complex. And I also noted in the Q&A that Doreen highlighted the Sustainable Products Initiative and eco-design. So I think there's many elements. I think we need to incentivize those companies that are achieving climate neutral services and products. And, you know, for example, on the demand side, I think what we looked at, and maybe I'll focus on this element because we just, you know, have this recent report, is that we need a better regulatory framework that does three major things, or three major elements to it. So first of all, what you need to do is look at what the embedded life cycle emissions are for products and materials. And then you need to look at reporting on this to see how you compare it and how it's transparent, to make sure that businesses and consumers can make an informed choice. And then you need to consider implementing targeted policies for this to overcome any barriers. So for example, you could look at minimum content quotas for innovative materials. You could consider how public procurement can drive this in some elements. You can consider many options once you have the data and you have some systems to do that. And beyond that, you will need funding for breakthrough technologies and innovation funding. This will, you know, these will also be critical because, of course, you need both sides of it. So I think that's some elements as to how you could do this, broadly speaking. And I do think a lot of the companies we work with are really keen to see these systems in place, and that they have the solutions. They have the solutions. There are solutions in steel, as we're hearing. There are solutions in cement and concrete. There are many solutions that can be put in place, but we need to scale this up. We need to drive forward the demand and drive the incentives for companies to do this rather than remain with the status quo as such.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ursula. I was thinking, Stefan, perhaps as our industry, one of our industry representatives here, if you would perhaps want to follow up on that, especially now that we are seeing or getting some first indications on where the upcoming reforms on both the EU ETS and CBAM specifically are going. What are your prospects on that, and how do you see this going?
First, I like the idea that the objectives of the policy instrument must be that polluter pays. Otherwise, you don't get the driving force to decarbonize, because that demands investments, and you have to be able to calculate and find a business case. Already now, you have to see that there are policy instruments that supports the operation of fossil-free or carbon dioxide-free processes. So it's really important that we already get this right from now and not wait until 2030, because then it's too late. If you have to see the business case already now, because if you build that plant, it will be up and running earliest maybe 2026, 2030. Otherwise, you push it further on. And when it comes to CBAM and the reform of the ETS, I said we need to have the value chain perspective. We can't be so narrow when it comes to ETS and benchmarks, and we need to see the value chain and see what is the best way of producing a product and what we need. And CBAM, I don't see the reason to keep free allocation if you have CBAM, unless in a way it's possible to have some sort of need for the exports out of EU based on carbon dioxide prices outside EU and so on. So it's not going into details, but I think you have to have this broader view on what do we want to solve with all these packages that we are now, the Fit for 55. What do we want to solve? What do we want to create? We want to create the transition on a cost-efficient way. So that's a really short answer.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Stefan. We have time, time has flown, and we have time for perhaps one last question. I would like to pick a question from the audience, from Sanjeev Kumar. He is proposing, why not make free allowances conditional on investments, like for instance, the resilience and recovery plans? If someone wants to take this question, perhaps Sam, you'd like to start, and we'll go like in an inverse order, maybe.
Yeah, thanks. This is a great point by Sanjeev. It has already been tested and tried under the ETS. There's the notorious Article 10C, where free allowances were conditional to investments in the power sector in Central and Eastern European countries, which was conceptually also a good idea, because these countries relying on single high emitting fuel, coal and lignite in the power sector were and are still in need of modernizing their power sector specifically. Now, when it came down to the conditionality of making sure that actually the free allowances help to diversify the energy mix in those countries, a lot went wrong, to be honest. A lot of the member states were not very strict in following the guidelines set by the European Commission. But I take the point. I think it's a fair idea. It's a fair proposal. For example, when we see currently gray hydrogen production under the ETS, if you have steam methane reforming, so you use fossil fuels to produce hydrogen, this is awarded free emission allowances. If you use 100% renewable electricity to produce the hydrogen, you're not getting any free emission allowances. So one potential answer could be, let's support the green hydrogen as well. I fear that by maintaining the free emission allowances at the same time, you keep the market failure and you add public support on top of that. It's perhaps not the smartest policy design going forward, but having more strings attached in general, making sure, for example, the auctioning revenues could be targeted to dedicated clean technology programs in those industrial sectors is something we would support. Yes.
Thank you, Sam, for answering the question. I'm not sure if anyone else would have some burning thoughts to respond to in 30 seconds. Anyone would want to add some very quick remark, quick conclusion? All right, I take my few seconds of silence as they know. So I would like to thank you very much to all our panelists for joining us today. I think it's been a very stimulating and interesting discussion, and lots of things that we've all noted down ahead of the upcoming reforms. Thank you very much once again for CE Delft for presenting the report once again, and also to Carbon Market Watch for hosting this webinar, on a personal note, also for trusting me for leading this discussion. And well, we're going to have ahead of July and after the summer a lot of discussions on that. So looking forward to the next debates and the next discussions. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you all.
Thank you
very much, all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Have a nice day.